Great turnout. Thanks for coming out, guys. Holy cow, this is the hardcore group. We are cleaning the wheat from the chaff here. Are we going, Donald? We good? All right. Thanks for coming out. Revit Triangle user group. It is a gorgeous night out, which is probably why we're a little low, but more food for everybody else here. More information as well. My name is Jason Kunkel. I'm with CAD Microsystems. We are a technology consultant organization for design and construction and building operations. We sponsor a user group here. We sponsor a user group up in Richmond. We sponsor a user group up in DC. Sponsor a user group up in Baltimore. And our goal here is just to kind of educate and share knowledge and kind of help build community there. So with that, we are broadcasting, we're recording, because I'm sure things tonight are going to be awesome and you're going to want to share it with everybody you want. So feel free to track down the recordings on YouTube. Tonight, Laura's going to be doing show and tell for us. After that, I've got a little spiel on Forge and design automation, API and Revit. It's a little nerdy, and then we're taking the nerdiness back down to kind of standard user group level of nerdy, which frankly is a pretty high nerdy level already, where the 2 days are going to be talking about 2020 and what's new with 2020, correct? All right, so with that, it's all yours.
So what I'm really going to talk about now is an idea, am I good? Is an idea for our next user group meeting. Back when I was in Baltimore, I led our user group there, and once a year we would do a show and tell. But the concept being that the users, who don't always stand up here and talk, bring either a project or a family or just a concept of something they're doing and show it to the group. Could be super simple, could be something super crazy that you figured out how to do, but just to kind of get more into the day-to-day operations of how we all use the software. Since you all are here, I may be asking you to volunteer to actually show something at the next meeting. It's also a great way to present to other people and get other ideas on what exactly you are doing. So this is my show and tell. I'm going to talk about a few things I did on this particular project. So architects, I know there's a couple in here. You all, since we are part of the very super nerdy crew who are here and not outside right now, probably already do this. But a good idea of having QA/QC views, in this case, highlighting rated walls red and then rated doors red. So it's just a really quick way, especially for someone who may not be super Revit savvy, to come in and say, okay, well that's right, here's my rated door. I don't know how to use David's mouse, but make do. And then I can say, oh wait, this door is rated, but it's not on a rated wall. That needs to be switched out. So it's just a really easy visual check for things. I also created a door tag that shows the door number and the hardware schedule. So if you're either reviewing your hardware schedule from a hardware consultant, or you're going through and reviewing submittals, you can really easily go through. I will usually print this out and kind of highlight as I go, but to make sure that I've got the right hardware set with the right door, instead of having to flip back between my plan and then my door schedule. So I've set up all sorts of different QA/QC views like this with things kind of color-coded, just so that I, being a visual person, can look in and see what's going on. This is one example. So most recently, I'm working on a project where we have, oh, by the way, I'm Laura Kaiser. I work with Clancy and Thays Construction Company. So I've moved out of the architecture world. Now I'm in construction. So in this particular project, here's a stair, and then underneath this stair, so we have terrazzo treads on the stair. This landing is terrazzo, and then it continues underneath to become a surface for this reception desk that's under the stairs. Construction scheduling wise, that's actually really complicated, because we've also got down here is a concrete stair and then a steel stair above. So we've got concrete stair, steel stair, terrazzo treads, and the terrazzo has to run continuous under the steel stair to become part of this reception desk. So they enlisted our BIM team's help to try and figure out, the first step was how to actually, to give them just some views of how this actually would be staged so that they could talk to the appropriate subcontractors to see who would be where and how that would go. So this was just really simple Revit visualization. Oh, and then glass railings, you know, how that's all going to work as well. So that they could quickly see how it was going to work. And then I also went in and did this was a model that we got from the architect on the job, but then I went in and did some extra modeling on top of what the actual terrazzo tread thickness would be based on submittals. So we were just doing kind of extra modeling just to make sure that this would all work out in the end. So not anything super sexy, but really helpful in just trying to help the construction process along. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about with the show and tell, something that's really simple, or like I said, it could be on the other end. So if anyone would like to do this, let me know, or let anyone on the advisory team know, and we'll get that scheduled. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to talk about Forge.
Cool, awesome.
Do you want me to close this? Leave it open?
Great. So the show and tell is at the next July. That's the target.
It might be September.
September, okay.
We are proposing.
Cool. Awesome. I love it. Where is it? There's a folder on the desktop? Desktop. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Forge tonight. Everybody's heard BIM 360. Everybody's heard of Forge? Have you heard of Forge? Yes, no? Have you seen that picture that Autodesk uses to explain what BIM 360 is? It's like a circle stage with like the 4 things behind it. At the bottom, the kind of the cake layer at the very, very bottom is Forge. So I apparently have some restricted fonts. We're not going to worry about that. So what is Forge? Why should I care? All right. Again, my name is Jason Kunkel. Work for CAD Microsystems. A little warning. I just like using this slide whenever I can use this slide. But we are going to be taking the nerd level up to about 11 for this presentation tonight. So fair warning. Bear with me. Let's go. I want to make sure we're on the same page. I want to talk about a little bit about APIs, just at 30,000 feet, because that's kind of the foundation of what we're talking about. We'll talk a little bit about Revit APIs, and we're going to talk then about Forge specifically. And we'll drill into the design automation API for Revit, which is a part of Forge. And it's the one that's I'm most excited about, and it's the one that's really most applicable directly to the Revit user group here. So with the APIs from 30,000 feet, what is an API? A good old acronym, Application Programming Interface, and essentially what it is a set of tools that allows programmers to write software for another program. So if you're using the user interface, if you're using the UI, that's kind of the front door into a piece of software. The API is the back door. And so with that, there's guidelines, there's rules. Whoever writes the software will also write the API for that software, allowing folks in. With that, there is a Revit API. So that's my API that's designed specifically for Revit. It actually hasn't been around forever. So I can't remember what version they released it in, but when I first started using Revit, they're like, there's no API, there never will be an API, and then there was an API. So that's why we have a whole host of add-ins that you can install and load on top of Revit. Typically, when a new feature is introduced in Revit, that new feature is accessible inside the API as well. So everything they're talking about after me with the 2020, people can do that programmatically. Old features, most of them are in the API. But some are still missing. For example, there is no programmatic way to make a ceiling. We don't know why. It's just not there. You can make walls, you can make floors, you can make roofs, you can make a whole bunch of other stuff, just no ceilings. So if you want to do that programmatically, you cannot. You can only do that through the user interface. But most things you look for, if it's inside of Revit, you can do it through the API, and you can get your third-party software to tack in and do it there as well. What this allows programmers to do is to access and modify Revit files, but they have to run through Revit. So if I write something for the Revit API, I basically am writing something on the desktop, expecting someone to open Revit, and then maybe you open a model, maybe open a component file, but then my API, my program that I write is going to basically go through Revit to access those models. So I've got to have a license, I've got to have a computer that can run Revit, I've got to have all those things that you're expecting when you're going to handle Revit. There are gobs of stuff out there. We talk about Dynamo all the time now. Dynamo is kind of a skin on top of the API. So Dynamo can only do things that the API can do, but it puts that graphic, you know, the candy box spaghetti interface on top of it. Autodesk has their own applications that they program for the API. So not functionality that's built directly into Revit, but things and tools that they build and they allow you to install on it. This is the model checker. That's an Autodesk application. It enhances the functionality of Revit, allows you to do things with your models, but it is now not baked into there as well. We, of course, have our own add-ins. This is our Filter Plus. Little plug for it. If you're not using it, you're wasting your time. Keynote Manager, this is another third-party one. I think a lot of people probably have heard of Keynote Manager and use Keynote Manager. There is a blog, revitaddons.blogspot.com, I believe. Does anybody else go there? That's it, right? revitaddons.blogspot.com. Hasn't been updated a lot recently. I think the guy took a new job, but he's updating it periodically. And I mean, daily there'd be like 2 or 3 new Revit add-ins that he would just kind of put up there, and here's what it does, and here's what it doesn't do. Some are huge. If you recall a couple years ago when you could download and install the Site Designer extension add-in, right? That was originally developed by Eagle Point. Autodesk bought it. That is an absolutely huge add-in. That functionality is not inside the software. And then there's some add-ins that do like one thing. They'll turn your sheet names to all caps. Those are both add-ins, but the range of what you can do with these things is, you know, hugely across each other. So that is our drill down into what an API is and what it does. It lets programmers work with other software. The Revit has its own API, but the key is that your Revit add-ins have to be run inside of Revit. So that's the baseline I want to start with. I do want to get into Forge a little bit. Forge at a high level, it is a series of web-based APIs, obviously for application development. It's not its own product. It is a platform that allows people to develop tools and develop products on top of it. So I mentioned BIM 360. I'm talking about Forge as well. BIM 360 is built on the Forge APIs. So a lot of things you see in the Forge APIs look exactly like a functionality in BIM 360. That's because they're the exact same thing. The Autodesk tools are calling the Forge APIs as well. And this is the current iteration of BIM 360. If we talk about BIM 360 Classic, you know, the old version, that is not on Forge. That's why, if you remember, there's kind of a transition period and a migration period. So everything new that is being built into BIM 360 now is being built inside of, built on top of Forge. It's made by Autodesk, so it targets their software and their specific industries. It's not always reliant on BIM 360, but like I said, BIM 360 does rely on Forge itself. So these are all my different APIs. These are different parts in here. When programmers are developing applications, they don't have to exclusively just use one. It's not a one-for-one. It depends on what you need to do. So just because there's something in this API and you need something over there, that's fine. You can write a piece of software that calls multiple APIs if you need to. You can call things outside of the Forge APIs as well. If you need to access an Azure-hosted SQL database, you can do that along with doing everything else inside of Forge here too. So these are the pieces, parts. Breaking it down, TokenFlex API. This is for large organizations to monitor and track their usage, and it's really boring, so we're not going to talk about it. The Reality Capture API is pretty cool, but it's kind of a one-trick pony. This is where you go and you convert your photographs to 3D models. So, Recap does that, but the Forge API has functionality in there where you want to write your own software that does that. You can do that. And you don't have to worry about the heavy lifting, which is all the math and all the algorithms to make sure all those photos line up. There's a data management API, and basically this is file management inside of BIM 360. So I want to create a new folder. I want to move files around. I want to copy files back and forth. There's a couple that rely on the data management API where you can sync up your BIM 360 project with a Dropbox folder or vice versa. This is the API that they need to touch when they're dealing with that one. Authentication is important but boring. This is basically who can log into BIM 360 and how long are they allowed to log into it. So very critical, very, very boring. There's the model derivative API, which has a really cool name, but it really doesn't do some very exciting things. So when you are looking at your Revit model or your Navisworks model or your STL file or something you've uploaded to BIM 360, you know, you get that large model viewer and you can pan around, you can select things and see the properties. That is not your native Revit file. That has been translated into another format here. The model derivative API is what has done that translation to the model to allow you to view it in there. So you can convert it over that file, which is the SVF file. You can make it an OBJ file, or you can also make it an STL file. And you can pull thumb information out of it, and you can make a thumbnail from it, which is like great. Yeah, it's exciting. Webhooks are pretty cool. We haven't seen a lot of use out of these yet. It's a little new. But a webhook is a function that you can build that's going to monitor your BIM 360 folders and your files in there. And if something happens to those files or folders, you can call an action on it. So for some reason, if I wanted to send a tweet every time somebody successfully synchronizes their Revit model that's hosted on BIM 360, the webhooks would allow me to do that. So obviously that's not a practical excuse, but that's kind of shows you the demonstration of I can get this API, talking with this API, and allow changes in my project to trigger things via the webhooks. So this one, we're pretty excited about it. Tells you when a forge job is done, when a file or folder is updated or deleted, or your model is synced, and then you kind of build and tell your application what to do when it gets that notification. So that one we like a lot. There's kind of this all-encompassing one called the BIM 360 API. There's account admin, so changing permissions, adding users. There's the document management API, which we talked a little bit about before, which is the data management API. And then it's a bit of a catch-all for some of the new BIM 360 features. So issues and RFIs and the checklists were kind of released relatively recently in the BIM 360 world. The BIM 360 API allows you to manage and create and edit those outside of BIM 360. So they're still going to impact your BIM 360 project and your BIM 360 issues and things in there, but if you don't like that interface, or if you need to do something in bulk, you can create your own program that is going to impact and modify and change all that stuff in your project. So that's what this API does. This is the Viewer API, so it allows you to open up the 3D and 2D files. This is most likely what you've seen when you've seen demonstrations on BIM 360, or even if you've seen a demonstration on Forge before, because it's graphical, it's, you know, it's there, it's pretty just interesting to look at. So the last one that that's here in my list, but the big one I want to talk about is the Design Automation API. There is one for AutoCAD, there is now one for Revit, there's 3ds Max, and there's Inventor. So they each do something a little different, but the basic idea is giving you cloud-hosted access to the software. So if you want to think of like a headless version of the application running on Amazon Web Services, that's essentially what this is allowing you to do. So I'm going to drill into the Revit one, but they all function kind of the same. You can make a desktop application. You can make a web-based application with this. So, you know, a Windows program or a website, either one. And that kind of applies to most of the other ones as well. Now, your application and your files do have to be internet accessible, because the Forge API lives on the web. So to call the commands from the Forge API, I've got to be able to look at the internet and call back from the internet as well. Like I mentioned, it's kind of a headless Revit. What most people are doing, what we are doing in our Forge development right now, we're identifying some of our desktop add-ins for Revit that would function well kind of in a, you know, in its own environment by itself, and you kind of strip out the user interface. And if it needs a user interface, you have to convert that over to your application or a web page on there as well. Because you don't see Revit. You don't say file open. You basically, you know, send command line strings or command line string commands to Revit. Say, here's the file, here's the command I want you to run, here's some other input I need, and then Revit just does it, and it does it for you, and it spits out your output. Like I mentioned, the UI is through your application. So conceptually, from a conceptual end, what can we do with it? Offset processor heavy tasks from your PC. Rendering in the cloud is awesome. That's sped up a lot of things. If you have another application, another desktop app that you're using that just slogs down your computer and takes up a lot of time, sticking it up inside of Forge in the Design Automation API is a great way just to let them do it. Let Amazon Web Services do it for you. If the Revit API can do it, you pretty much can do it inside of the Design Automation API. Obviously, like I mentioned, if there's graphic interface needed, if you need to graphically select an element, Design Automation is not going to do it. You've got to be able to identify those elements before you kick the command off. This is kind of a big thing, which hopefully will start clicking in heads. Revit is not needed. So to run any other Revit add-in, I need to have Revit on my desktop, which means I need to have a Revit license. To run an application on Forge with the Design Automation API, I do not need to own Revit. I do need a Revit model. So someone else can make the Revit model, stick it somewhere on the internet. I could build a web page that manipulates that model, let somebody else work on the web page, and it will go through the Design Automation API and update my Revit file. So really, the way I see it, what's got me excited about it is this idea of team member collaboration without the need for Revit. Back in my prior life, we did a lot of detention work. I've probably mentioned that before here. It's in my psyche, and I'm trying to forget it. But we had a fellow who was just phenomenal on security systems. He just knew security inside and out. And he was responsible for door schedule keying and make sure all the doors would line up and this would lock when this locked. We had our model in Revit, so he didn't know how to use Revit, so we'd print out the schedule and he'd mark it up and we'd send it back. This was kind of before, like, Excel to R and kind of the Excel connections. But at this point, I would seriously consider designing an application for him that only looks at the doors. It only peels out the door hardware and key information that he needs, and he can update it and push it directly into the Revit model without needing Revit at all. So that's what I like to think about when I think about allowing other team members without the design software access into my model and access only parts of the model that I want to give them access to. So this is kind of from a conceptual end of what we're thinking about doing it. These are some real world examples we saw. A couple months ago, I was up at the Autodesk office up in New England, and they had what's called the Forge Accelerator. Has anybody done an accelerator before? It's just kind of like nerd camp, and you go there for a week, and like, here's my idea, here's what I want to make, and their inside team is there, and you work with them, and you bounce things back and forth. So a lot of these ideas are things I saw other people working on at the accelerator. This one was pretty cool. This was an online family parameter editor. So if I have some shared parameters now and I want somebody else to use those shared parameters, I have to send my shared parameter text file. I have to ask them to load those parameters up into my family. Hopefully they get the right ones. Hopefully they're type or instance, whichever one I need it. This website, they built a website, again, very proof of concept, but you could see where it's going. You could load an RFA file up to the website. You would click a button, and then the Design Automation API would push the parameters in there automatically. They would download the RFA, and it was ready for them to use. So no weird interaction. Obviously, they could build a bulk uploader for it and have it do in bulk. The next steps they wanted to do was not only would you push the parameters themselves, they'd get a little form online, so you could start filling the parameters out, and it would push all those in the RFAs as well and have them all ready to download. So that was pretty cool. Another guy had a residential model builder. This is something that kind of clicked in my head because I've seen it used. I've seen similar applications for AutoCAD architecture. This was obviously inside of Revit. So he was a residential home builder. He had a model. He went down the options route, which he had a good reason for. I'm not sure I would have gone the options route, but basically had like a super model with every single variation on his base floor plan as an option set and every variation in there as an option. So there was just gobs of option sets and gobs of options. And his idea, and he made it work through one of the options, but again, expand this logically. He's got this super model sitting in a cloud. A client goes to the website, says, I want this garage, I want this porch, I want this. They check off the option, what they want. Design Automation strips out all of the options they don't want, merges everything into the master file, and then they have one single Revit file with all the correct options already created and already set up for them. So I thought that was pretty slick. What I was up there working on, we build the model checker for Autodesk. We are working on, hopefully we'll be in beta at some point soon, but we are looking at converting and moving the model checker from a desktop application to an online application. So instead of needing to run Revit, I log into a website, I point to my Revit files that are hosted on BIM 360, I select my check set, and I say run it. Our thoughts with this, ultimately we could lead to scheduling, we could hook into those webhooks, so as soon as somebody uploads a new model to a certain folder, it will run a model check and they'll get a compliance report on it from there. One of the Autodesk developers is working on this pretty interesting web-hosted layout tool. So it's just kind of a graph paper interface. You draw some lines. Those lines magically become walls in Revit. You drag on what picture of the couch. This couch family file loads up inside of a Revit model. So a lot of work to do, but again, it's taking, as needed, Revit away from the people you don't want to touch Revit. And you can still work in Revit and manipulate Revit there. So I am really, really excited about the potential here. I don't like saying things like revolutionary or earth-changing or anything like that, but I'm like really nerdily excited about it. It's never utopia. Some things to watch out for. It is definitely still in beta. Beta, beta, beta. Don't use it for your production. Test it out. Do some really cool stuff, but it is still in beta. We're finding the documentary for Forge overall is kind of spotty. If you kind of look at old blogs and old posts, they may be referring to a very old version of the API that just doesn't apply anymore. So watch out as you're kicking that around. This is a big issue and probably one of the reasons they're still in beta. This is the top item that the development team is working on. They're fully aware of this problem. Right now, the design automation for Revit cannot access a workshare model and pull out a local copy. So you are basically using a detached copy every time you do it. So if you've got a standalone file, that's fine. If you are simply reviewing it and not making changes, that's fine. But right now, this is a big production-wise limitation. But again, this is the #1 issue they are working past. Yeah?
Is that included on BIM 360?
That's included on BIM 360, yep. Yep, if you've got the cloud-hosted work-shared model, right? Is that what you're asking? Yep, yep.
It can't actually work along with you on BIM 360. It just pulls it out.
Correct. Currently, it just makes a copy of it. And the reason for that right now is it's all on AWS, and there's security issues around the virtual machines that run on Amazon Web Services, and it kind of quarantines those computers that are running. And so it's literally like I take a floppy disk of my Revit model, and I walk over to this other computer, and I plug it in. And so there's a break there, and that's for security reasons to make sure your virtual machine can't leak into another virtual machine. But again, this is the top thing that they tell us they're working on because it's a big thing. But once they crack this, I'm again still very excited about the potential here. And then think about how your world is going to change forever. Yeah. Here's my crazy future thoughts with good old Doc Brown. This is, of course, starting to take the Revit out of the Revit file. I don't think what we see currently as design automation is going to be the final form of this, but this is certainly leading us to, instead of we got a Revit model, we've got a cloud-hosted database, and we are able to peel into here. So I think the workflows and the things that we put forward as necessary and required are going to help kind of dictate that next form of what this is all going to look like. Again, that cloud-hosted Revit model really doesn't need to be a single file ultimately. It can be a series of tables living somewhere. It's a little interesting. So with that, again, I apologize for taking that nerd level up. Hopefully you got some ideas, some thoughts there. Is everybody still awake? Are we good? Wrap up, Forge is my overall web-based API. Design Automation API for Revit is a piece of the Forge offerings that lets me allow other people through applications touch Revit models without touching Revit at all. So, how am I time? Did I do okay on time? I don't have a clock. Sure, good enough. Questions at all on what we chatted? Yes, ma'am.
Do you think this would be a way for, like, for owners to be able to interact better with the information that they're using? Because right now they're just requesting ref files.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
But we don't think they're going to be.
Yep. So the question was, is this possibly a way for owners to better interact with the model? And I think 100%. Yep. If they can define what they want out of the model, you can give them a different way to look at that data that they don't have to open Revit and they don't have to worry about this. It's like, yep, go to this website. Here's exactly what you want to see. You know, so many owners buy Revit just so they can open the models that they don't really need. And again, I think this is just a brilliant way to kind of let them peek under the hood. Yep. Any other questions? Is that too nerdy? Is that good nerdy? So we got some ideas kicking around their head on it. Like I said, I'm pretty excited. Yeah.
I know someday, in this somewhat distant future, all Revit's models will live on BIM 360. We won't work in our own office at all, right?
Right.
But until we get there, is there any way to leverage the Forge on a, not a local copy, but a non-360 copy?
So the question is, can you leverage Forge on non-BIM 360 Revit models? 100%. I've got to be able to upload it to the internet because it still has to go to that Amazon, you know, that AWS virtual machine. But I can totally, as an Autodesk partner, it's hard for me to say this, but I could totally bypass BIM 360 if I want. I can just, you know, build an application on my desktop, point to something sitting on my file server, it sends it up, it runs it, brings it back. Yep, it does not have to be there. There's pricing models and stuff, so at some point they're still getting your cash. Right now the pricing I think is pretty much free because it's all beta, and they're trying to figure out workloads and things like that. But you know what they've been talking about is not a high cost issue at all. It's just not. So yeah, there you go. Good question. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing that with me. Oh, one more.
It's kind of about BIM 360.
Mm-hmm.
Working with BIM 360, you realize that there's a different model on your website on BIM 360 than what's behind the Revit software. You know, you have to publish it.
Yes.
And so like when people are working on it, it's a different version, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know or can you tell us more about that? Like does Forge just go to the one that's online? Or can it access, like is that one that's behind everything, is that actually on the internet? Or is it, where is it? I mean, there's no.
So I think you're asking kind of about like the publishing and the sets and the, you know, that kind of workflow inside of BIM 360? Yeah, so that's its own presentation, so I'm not going to dive into that. But ultimately, if you do want to grab your model on via the Forge application, you can get to any one of those versions, as long as you have permissions to get that file. Right? That's what kind of locks it down at this point is, what do I don't have a right to this folder, so I can't see this folder. It's the same thing if I log in with a Forge application. If I don't have a right to this folder, I'm not going to see it through my Forge application either. Does that make sense? Yeah, so you've got like your working model, then you've got like your published model out there essentially.
Right, but the
Yep.
working one you can't see on the internet.
If it's on BIM 360, you should be able to see it on the internet as long as you've got rights to it.
You have to publish it.
You can do live linking.
How do you do that? No.
Yeah, you can do live linking directly to the working model if you want. Again, it's more of a permission setup and stuff.
Okay.
Yep. But it sounds like maybe another BIM 360 talk is in order at some point.
There's so much
Yeah.
about BIM 360
Yeah.
that is really, there's not enough information as far as like step
Yep.
one, step two, like how do I do this? It's just kind of wide open.
Yep.
I know it's new, and that's why.
And it's changing like weekly. Like they're adding new features here and new features there, and yeah, so it's.
I really like it. I mean, it's great. It takes a lot of the model management out. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to worry about any of that.
Yep. Yeah, it's I don't want to call it the Wild West, but it's definitely a very dynamic space right now.
That might be a good end of year topic.
Oh.
It's probably changed from even when was that, March or so? When Eric Chappell was here talking about.
It was before March, wasn't it? Yep, yep. Yeah, I think another future topic would be great for BIM 360. So, okay, I'm done. You're up.
Yes, quick audio check, see if I'm on. Should be. Can you hear me? Testing, testing. Yep. Okay, good. Exit out of this one. Close that. Hi, I'm David Rayner. I'm with Dewberry Engineers. I tend to oversee a lot of those Revit day-to-day things. We aren't quite up to 2020 yet, but we will be before we know it, probably about a year from now, is what I notice. Being the engineers, we tend to follow what everyone else is up to, but I like getting to know what the new features are as early as possible. So one that we can finally do, we can import a PDF. How are you tired of taking all these PDFs and converting them to either a TIFF or a JPEG so that you can load it and use it as a background or for tracing paper and working with? So this is pretty cool. Let me see. Where's my next? There it is. So I'm going to pop Revit open here in a minute and do some live demonstrations. But basically on the Insert tab, press the button for PDF, just like an image file you normally would. You get this little pop-up that comes up. You can do thumbnail previews. You can pick which page of a multi-page PDF. So if you've got 10 sheets in your set and you're linking another drawing out of the set of PDFs, you can pick which page. You can also choose a resolution. And of course, the higher the resolution, the better it looks, but the more it takes when you go to print with raster. Yes, PDFs will require you to print to raster. Another really cool one I'll show you at the end here is you can, if the PDF was printed to a PDF versus scanned to a PDF, you can actually use it to snap to. That makes it really nice. Don't always get it, but it's nice when it works. I'm sure that does affect the quality. And I've already seen tweets going out about people testing the quality and the accuracy of it. They would take a Revit model with the walls at 30 degrees, export it to PDF, bring it back in, and see if they still get 30 degrees, and they get 29.99999. Now, some of that might be due to anti-aliasing when it goes to print. I'm not sure, but there's definitely some accuracy that you might have to worry about for fine-tuning. Revit tends to be picky about those things. So let me see. Alt-Tab. Close this one. So we're not doing a monumental staircase. You would not want me doing stairs. Let's see here, sample model. Is that it? We'll come back to that part of it later. But for now, it's going to come up here and insert, hey, PDF. I have one prepared here that will look very similar to what you see back there. Hey, 72 dots per inch, all the way up to 600 are our choices. This one only has one page, sorry. Hit OK. Being outside of my crop region, I wonder if I'll see it. No. Plop it right there. Turn off cropping. And there is the PDF. Pretty nice, pretty good quality. You could already use that as a background if you needed to. Also notice you can come up here and think you can override by element and say, oh, you can't halftone it, but can you change the color? Nope. Problem with thinking on the fly. Okay. Does it scale? Comes in 1-to-1 is what I expect it is. If I measure this door, it should be a 3-foot door. So if I come in here, that's usually my go-to check. Yep, 3 foot. It was an 1/8 inch scale drawing. This is an 1/8 inch scale view. So you will need to pay attention to that. But now if I come up here and I have it selected, I can enable snaps. Well, let's see here. Now with that enabled, I could go to Annotate, Detail Lines, and use the Pick Lines button. And if I pick a line, it is actually creating lines there, directly over that wall. But why would I start with just lines? I mean, walls are essentially just lines. Why don't I just go to walls? And then I could pick a line. And I might say I want the finished face interior here. And just for clarity, I'm going to make sure our walls stand out. I'll make them pink. And I'll give them a weight of like 5. Okay, what am I doing here? Says it's not visible. But I turned off cropping. Well, that's not a good choice. Well, that's where I was doing it earlier. No.
It has a foreground, background option.
It does have that.
One of the options bar. No, yeah. That is not.
Well, I had that working earlier.
Isn't there like a blog post like the, 50 things to check in Revit, why can't I see my elements? It's because the base offset of your
Yep.
walls itself.
7 feet. There you go.
There we go. How did that, when did that happen? Now, unfortunately, it doesn't recognize that there's doors there. So you'll still have to use the old trim commands. Trim extend. Extend. Okay, that's enough of the error messages. You get the idea. You can start, if it's a wall, you can pick the exterior face of it, and you can know the thickness of your wall, and then just pick and click all the way around, trim and extend. Pretty cool feature. And I'm excited to use it for ductwork or piping and when those come about. So let's see, PowerPoint. I did, yep. If you scan it in, you don't get the same thing. Yeah, so that was all for that one. Path of travel. This one's kind of cool and sort of fun to play with. Again, you go to the Analyze tab this time, but they hid this one all the way on the other side. So it's almost like a tennis match. You're going to go back and forth a bit. Once you get it open, I wanted to point out, you know how they like to hide things under these little arrowheads? There's a teeny tiny arrowhead in the corner there that brings up a pretty important dialogue. If you would like casework to be considered an obstacle, you'll need to make that choice. Otherwise, people will run right through it. Furniture, I think you'll have to select, a few things like that. But right out of the box, I found it works pretty good. The other thing I thought was funny is most of the properties about it are not editable. So if you think you walk faster than 3 miles per hour, you're going to have to wait till they open that up. They also don't have the to or from room available yet. When I looked it up, they said that's for future use. So I'm curious to know what they're going to use that for. All right. So a quick little demo of that. Come down here to my other model. Hey, there's my pink walls. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. And it's on the Analyze and all the way over the other end. And you really just pick 2 points. So if I want to know how long it takes this person here to get to the restroom over here, and it automatically goes through all the doors, kind of noticed went through the window there, all the way down to the bathroom. And it really does pick whatever point you pick on. If I select it here, there's those same properties. And you can give it a mark value. If I can type in there. There we go. Path to restroom. Now, the reason I wanted to go ahead and put something in there as a value for that is you can schedule these. So new schedule, path of travel. And you can pick all these properties to add to it. And just like with any other schedule, you can then do calculated parameters in case you did think you walked faster than 3 miles per hour. Now, I found that pretty interesting. And of course, I wanted to see where some limits were. So I tried going to the second floor and routing a path out the front door on the first floor. It did not make the leap from one floor to the next. So room for improvement there. Or maybe just a couple of compiled things that you add together. Get to the stairs, out of the stairs. Would probably work.
I could see it being useful for like testing egress distances, not necessarily giving you a final product.
Yep. The comment was that she could see it being useful for testing egress methods, not necessarily a final product. Okay. Yes. So I did notice that the line style is up here is path of travel lines. If I went to a hidden line, though, it does change the style of it. So it's whatever line styles you have defined. It defaults to that one, but I think you can change them. Okay. Now here's one I'm excited about. They finally started opening up some new properties that we can add to our schedules. Now, I use scope boxes heavily because I like all of my views to be looking at the same place. Now, the only downside to that is sometimes you want like an odd-shaped viewport. It's not such a good strategy for that. You tend to wait till the end of the project and then remove all of that work. All of the work of associating the views to the scope boxes. But that's a very quick way to lay out a project. Well, here you can quickly see on a schedule what views are associated to which scope box. That's pretty awesome. Another one they've opened up to us is the elevation from level. For years, I have harped on offset being a useless parameter because you could not tag it and you could not schedule it. Well, imagine you have light fixtures, air terminals, receptacles, wall switches, and you want to schedule the offset. You had to make your own parameter. And that's kind of what you're seeing here. I have my own parameter here for ceiling height, but I won't have to use that anymore. There's now elevation from level, which may change a lot of my content, which is unfortunate. But that's the price of progress, right? Another one that I'm very excited about, you can finally copy and paste a legend from one sheet to another. And then if you regretted that decision, you can actually select all and delete them. That really opens up the power of legends being able to be on multiple sheets, because before you had to place one on every sheet. And hopefully you did so in the same spot every time. So a lot of people wrote programs and add-ons like we were talking about earlier just to copy and paste legends. So thank you, Autodesk, for finally opening that up to us. That one's been frustrating for years. And I think that's all the ones I've prepared for. Next, I'm going to turn it over to thing number 2. This is David Butts.
We've been known as thing number 1 and thing number 2 because we've known each other too long. So
We have.
I'm going to see if
See here, yours is.
this is what happens when you let two of us drive. It gets a little bit scary here. You're driving. No, I'm driving. Right-hand driver.
Nope, not that one.
Oh, not that one. Jason's already done that one. Oh.
Yeah, we don't want that one again. Where is yours?
Revit. Yeah, Revit 20,
Ah.
20 electrical updates.
I'll get out of your way.
Okay. I also have to open up Revit too, so let me just kind of. I had to turn my mic on. Now you can hear me, right? So do I need to start over? No. But either way, what happened is we actually got involved with looking at how we could improve what electrical is doing. So there was a big push this past couple of years to make things work a lot better. And every Thursday night at 8 o'clock at night, every 2 weeks, I'm working with the development team saying, okay, how do we make this better? A lot of good people helping out with that. Craig Woods, just another person that was helping out with this. So it's actually, one of the things that's really cool about it, to me, that relationship between Autodesk and the customer and how the program works is evolving at a better rate the last 2 years than I have since I started working with the product. And that was a long time ago. It was Revit 4 when it was out. So I want to talk about electrical a little bit here tonight and kind of go through this. So we're going to cover through a whole bunch of stuff here at once. One of the big ads right now is feed-through lugs and sub-feed lug connections. These actually work now. So I can create a sub-feed lug type panel so I don't have to kind of fake it to make things go together. When you create a circuit, there's the ability to add a circuit type now, whether it's a breaker or a feed-through lug. Because of this change, they've made some changes to the panel schedule templates to allow for different loads that are being parsed through from one panel to another. The electrical circuits now have the ability to customize error types and how you see home run errors. Before, you might have been lucky if you had two circuits going together that you got the errors to show up correctly with two error heads on the line. In some cases, I've actually seen error heads show up on every single wire. So that was a kind of a little bug that kept showing up all the time. And then like David was referring to earlier, there's some elevation changes that have really helped us out. So the dynamo routine, the only one that I've ever written in my life about showing bottom of pipe elevation, I can actually throw that thing away now. So that's a good thing. So again, these are just some of the MEP things that we're working on. I've got a few examples of pictures here to show you. So let's just jump into the program here real quick. And I have to go into my vision here so I can show you this. So first off, let's talk about what we've got with this particular view in here. So if you take a look in here, you see I've got some devices that are already connected. And if I take a look at this particular set of devices on this circuit, if I select the circuit, you're going to see a couple of options up here that are new. Now, Circuit Path was something that came out in 2019. I don't know how many people are actually using this. This is actually a great tool because this actually helps you get a more accurate voltage drop calculation. By default, the circuit path goes to 9 feet, but you can adjust the height of it and make it a lot taller or shorter as you need to, and you can actually edit a representation of this path. So again, what we're trying to do is get more accurate load calculations into the program here. With this particular connection, when I created the connection, I can say that this is actually going to be a breaker connection. So this is a normal power connection. I've got a normal circuit in here, and what I'm trying to do is to create that relationship as a breaker. So when I come over here to my other panel, I've got 3 panels in line in here. I can actually select this, and as I create the circuit between these devices, I can actually say, okay, what panel am I selecting to? Power panel 1. And now I can pick feed through lugs or breaker. So you see how I automatically do that relationship. Now the really cool part about this is now I can actually have an 84 circuit panel schedule that actually is carrying the loads correctly all the way through. So even if you have multiple panels, and you can go to a 128 circuit schedule, it doesn't matter. If I do 3 panels together, I can sum all that up, and then when I do the panel schedule, you'll see how the loads are coming along. So again, creating the circuit, still fairly easy in here. It's not really any more complicated than it was before. I just grab some devices, filter them out here and say, okay, I'm just going to do electrical fixtures. Say okay. And what I'm going to do is create the power circuit and say, let's go to power panel 2, my second circuit now. So I've got that feed going through to that other panel. Now when I come back and I do the panel schedule for this, I'm going to choose my default template. This is one that I just made a little while ago based on the default one. For feeding to an 84 lug panel, you see the load carrying through for that particular device. Now, this is just one that I don't have the whole load showing up on this panel, but you can see where I've added a section in here and where I have my feed through lug connected. So you see how the load is passing through here now. So I've got the total load from both panels, and I have the load from this panel and the load from the other panel adding through here now. This is a huge improvement. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with doing electrical drawings, but the workarounds that we had to go through to get this stuff to work was just, it was just crazy, the things that we had to do behind the scenes to make it work. We were actually manually putting these values in here, and that was not a good way to go with things. And I can continue to add loads to this. So as I go back over here to my power plan, and I do the same step in here, I go back and I'll create one more circuit here. Grab these guys, filter them out. Say, hey, let's just do the space tags. Pick OK. And now I can come back over and say, all right, what am I going to do with this circuit? I can again select the circuit that I want to be on, 1, 2, or 3. So if I assign it to panel 3, I tell it it's a breaker in that circuit. Now I can do the same thing. I create that relationship, and I say, all right, I'm doing a power connection. This is going to become a feed-through lug. And now it's going to tell you that if this panel doesn't have this property, this is a nice little better answer solution than just getting the old, you remember in the old AutoCAD days where you used to get the red circle of death? And then they gave you the yellow triangle of hope. That's what we actually called those things. You get the yellow triangle message, and it's like, we're going to give you a little bit of hope and maybe tell you what's wrong. Well, in this case, it's actually saying, hey, this is not enabled, it's not checked. If you want it to be fed through lugs, just check the parameter on the properties and then set the connection type. So all I have to do is say enable feed through lugs, and it creates that connection, and then all I have to do is just basically select my panel. So you can see how I'm actually daisy chaining several panels together here. And as I go back to my panel schedule, I'll see all those loads populated all the way through. That's cool. And when you think about data and how we're parsing data now, and as you look at Forge, you look at what Jason was referring to earlier about being able to harvest that data out of the model. This is a more predictable result for the data that we need, that even if we go to external programs to do load calculations, think ahead, this is a way that we can get a better representation of that data of how it's supposed to be connected in the model. So that's a pretty cool little feature, and when you think ahead about what Autodesk is doing with this, of exposing this data to make it more flexible, this is just a great representation of that tool. Now, a couple other things in here real quick to show you. If I go to Manage, and I go to MEP Settings, and I go down to my electrical settings now, did want to point a couple things out about wiring in here. This was always a problem child for me. When I come over here and I look at wiring, it's like, okay, how do I want to show the home run errors? So now I get this type of an option. I can choose to do multiple errors. So if I do 2 devices connected together to a junction box, and then I got the home run coming from the junction box, I can say, show me 2 errors to represent the 2 circuits, still show me a single error, and this is the fix for the other problem that we had, that now the errors will only show up on the end wire only. Okay, so I can get multiple errors and single errors just on that end wire, that last wire going out. Again, this was a huge problem. It's been around for years, especially if people who are still doing wiring. We don't, but occasionally we will still show a home run wire, and if I've got multiple circuits going through one connection, that's critical. Another really cool thing now is that I can steal. Begging, borrowing, and stealing is a great thing. You know, and a lot of people who work on projects know that that's what you do a lot of, is steal from another project. So what we're doing is just simply stealing the dimension arrowhead styles and saying, okay, we're going to open these up, and any arrowhead styles that are in your model right now can be used as a home run circuit wire. So you can actually customize these now and have a different looking home run arrow if you want. So it's a great little new feature there, and it may seem like it's simple, but getting the quality of the drafting that everybody gets so concerned about, that's a really big step. One of the things that David alluded to that, like I said, I'm really happy about that they finally did is changing how elevation is read. So I want to point out something here. If you look with cable tray and fittings, this has always been a problem because you always got offset. Where was offset measured to? It's measured to the center of the device. I've yet to see anybody place a cable tray by the center of the cable tray. And if we're doing water and wastewater like we are, and we have gravity-fed systems, what's the critical dimension? It's not the center of the pipe, it's the bottom of the pipe. Those are the critical dimensions. So all of these are now exposed now into 3 groups: top elevation, middle elevation, and bottom elevation. And it doesn't say offset. I'm so happy about that because now it's elevation relative to the level that you're working with. And these are exposed parameters. And this is the other thing that's critical about this. If I'm making a schedule, I don't have to go and create a parameter for this elevation. I don't have to write a formula to do the math to split a pipe diameter in half to give me a bottom of pipe elevation. It's actually reading the true pipe elevation. So in addition to having the routing capabilities, which we've had, to do top and bottom justification for duct and pipe and conduit and cable tray, I now have this information exposed so that I can put it in a tag, I can put it in a report, and I can put it in a schedule. These are huge improvements. And I know people talk about, well, it didn't have a whole lot in here. You know how much time I'm gonna save just with these improvements here? On every one of my projects, it's those little things that add up and make a big difference. So these are the three big ones that I had that I was really excited about. There's a lot more going on with 2020. We're gonna be rolling it out in September. We're a little bit ahead of David, but we kind of jump on this thing. We like to be on that bleeding edge. David's on the comfortable edge, and then he calls me up later and says, "How'd it go?" And I'll be sitting there going, "Help me!" No, but you know, it's really cool what they're doing with the software package and with the updates that come out on a more regular basis. You know, you just got a lot more stability. Has anybody got any questions so far about any of this stuff? Yes, sir.
I'm from architectural background, so this is
So, yeah, Jason's from an architectural background. He doesn't understand any of this. So that's fine. It is. Black magic.
The electrical guys I work with, though, they categorize the PQ lug as game changer. They will try to convince architects to upgrade to 2020 just for that.
Yeah,
Would you categorize it as that?
absolutely. We actually are debating for the first time since I've been here on certain projects. We're actually debating rolling this out early, and we don't do that. We have a highly customized version of Revit that we run, that we have a lot of our own add-ins and everything like that. And we have gigabytes of content. It takes us 6 months to get the product ready to roll out at a minimum. And the fact that we're looking at doing this on some of our current projects, you know, when I finally passed this on to our electrical group, you know, they got really excited about some of the changes. Now, they're always electrical. They're going to be looking for more. But the ability to have this data exposed is just much, much better. And the elevation stuff goes across the board on MEP. That just makes a big difference for all of our users, just kind of making it have a more natural nomenclature, natural word flow. A lot better. Easier to work with, too. Anybody else? Is it a game changer for other families? For other categories? Yeah, I think what I was reading through is like mechanical equipment, electrical fixtures, lighting devices, pipe, duct, conduit, cable tray, specialty equipment, furniture, casework. I don't know if doors and windows had that. I don't think they got the elevation mark, but I don't think they need it because they're a bunch of architects. They already know how it all works. Engineers, we're a little bit slower, so. Well, and here's the other flip side of it too. We use a lot of non-hosted families. We very rarely use hosted families, and part of the reason why we didn't was because the offset value is not working correctly. I'd be a lot more likely to look at them now to say, okay, this makes more sense for me to make this receptacle hosted because now I can tell somebody that the elevation, the middle elevation to the middle of the fixture is 1 foot 8 inches or 1 foot 6 inches, whatever the code requires. It's clear communication of what design intent is. Anybody else? Cool stuff?
I think that's cool because now Navis can read that, right? So you make
Oh, yes.
looking
Yeah.
at these properties, they're not, pulling,
Yeah, the comment is Navisworks can actually read this. So yes, Glue will be able to read this very well.
because you always get that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Bottom of pipe there, right?
Yeah, I can't tell what I need to look at properties where it just says center line of pipe.
Exactly.
Actually, was on a project, I was on a support call the other day where the guy was using, he wasn't allowed to get the other consultants' Revit project models because they were all on different versions. We're not talking about different builds, they were in different versions. And so what they were sharing were Navisworks files. But there were things missing out of the Navisworks files, and they were getting Navisworks files from 2016 Navisworks from that exporter, and so there was a lot of data that was missing, and the guy could not parse through and figure out, I don't even know what this device is. He couldn't figure it out. But just get everybody on 2020 and you have all this, you don't have to worry about it. I told him that, and he didn't like my response. I can't get these guys to upgrade. Don't ever go to a new release. Not in my case. I can't get there fast enough this time. Anybody else? We're good? Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up and hand it back to Jason real quick. And anybody else have any more comments, any more feedback? Anybody? I do want to close out by letting everybody know that Gannett Fleming is now officially a downtown business, and next month, or July, we're going to have the next Revit user group is going to be with us. So when you guys get to come, we're going to come pay a visit at our new location and come by and say hello. And parking is right across the street. You know where Char Grill is? You can park at Char Grill all you want. No, you can't. But right on the other side, they're building a new hotel there, and there's parking in there, and after 5 o'clock, parking's free.
Do you want to actually say where it is?
It's actually Glenwood 1. Yeah, if anybody knows where it is, it's at the very south end of Glenwood Avenue. But that's where our next Revit user group will be, and we really want as many people to come in and say hello. Not just for us. I mean, this to me, it's great that we can get more people in and have more opportunities down here. Because if you look, the business climate is evolving. Downtown Raleigh is a great example of this. And I'm really hoping we'll get somebody to come in and show us how they designed our building with Revit. So I'm working on that really hard right now. It's not going to happen? Oh, come on. You tried? I'll keep talking to him. Eric and I'll keep talking to him. Maybe we'll pay him money, give him $5 or something.
Showed a door schedule. I mean, or not even a door schedule.
They said the project was too simple. So,
Oh, we'll keep twisting their arm. We'll pay him. So keep yelling at him anyway. So anyway, thanks for having us here, and we'll see you guys in 2 months.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Thanks to the speakers. Grab some food. Lots of food.
Lots of food.
Yeah, we grabbed lots of food. We ordered less than last time. There's still lots of food.
Huh?
who'd you talk to?
I don't know. I was talking to people on the committee, you know, you and a couple other people.